You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with Rabia Khedr about World Braille Day. But first, some news headlines. Former Calgary mayoral candidate arrested after illegally entering US. Canada announces $40 billion plan to reform child welfare system for First Nations. Ontario Mosque donates $30,000 to local hospital. And Kazakhstan declares state of emergency, government resigns. And now the details. Former mayoral candidate Kevin Johnston was arrested by a US Customs and Border Protection agent after he did not appear in the courthouse to begin serving his jail sentence in Toronto. Instead, agents found Johnston illegally entering the United States on foot along the Saskatchewan-Montana border, and he was later discovered to be a fugitive wanted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Lebanese-Canadian businessman Mohammed Fakir won a defamation case against Johnston, who had referred to Fakir as a terrorist and baby killer. Johnston was sentenced to serve 18 months in jail. He is also to stand trial in British Columbia for assault. An agreement over the division of $40 billion for systemic reform and compensation was reached with First Nations people. Half of the proposed amount will be used to reform the child welfare system that was previously ruled to be discriminatory by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. The other half is to compensate First Nations people on reserve or in the Yukon province who were affected by inadequate child welfare policies between April 1991 to March 2022. First Nations people who were denied access to social or medical services will also receive payments. Jami Abu Bakr Siddiq Mosque donated $32,000 to the Scarborough Health Network Foundation, otherwise known as the SHN Foundation in Ontario. The donation was part of a larger pledge by the Scarborough Muslim Association to provide $100,000 to SHN Foundation. The initiative to raise the money was undertaken by students at the mosque. Sheikh Hanif Luhavi from the association thanked the students for their dedication and commitment, and the community for making the donation possible. Kazakhstan declared a state of emergency as protests against fuel price increases spread across the country. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev signed a government order to install a curfew and implement measures to protect public and strategic buildings. Restrictions on entry to and exit from the city will be implemented as well. Social networks, including Facebook and Telegram, were blocked. On Sunday, the government lifted the price caps on liquid petroleum gas, which sparked protests across the country. The government shortly reinstalled the gaps and resigned, both of which failed to quell the protesters. That's it for the news. Yesterday, it was World Braille Day, January 4th, designated by the United Nations General Assembly in 2018 as a day to mark World Braille Day, to mark the access to literacy for the blind and visually impaired. And the UN General Assembly did this because they thought something needed to be in written form, a special day, a special resolution to recognize the need for full human rights for the blind and visually impaired. We have with us today Rabia Khedr, CEO of Deen Support Services. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Sister Rabia, tell us World Braille Day, if it's a special day for you.
I wouldn't necessarily say that World Braille Day is special to me. Rather, it's a very important historic event. Braille was a code established by Louis Braille, and it really opened up the world of knowledge through touch for people with disabilities. So Braille indeed is a significant milestone in helping people who are blind or have very low vision or are partially sighted, as it were, to be able to read in various languages.
So I'm going to be asking you a few dumb questions in this interview today as part of a learning exercise for myself and hopefully the audience. You've used the word blind, and I know that we have tried to evolve respectful language in the last decades. A blind is a word I knew growing up, but is it still a word that we use as respect?
Oh, absolutely. So people have preferences in terms of how they choose to be described, but you know, it's either a person with a disability or people with disabilities, or you know, people who are blind, people who are partially sighted, people who have low or no vision. Some people prefer the term visually impaired. I kind of reject that. It's more of a medicalized term referencing impairment, but you know, I sort of play on the word impairment, that if I were impaired, I could be detoxed, and I can't.
Okay, so we'll stick with blind then.
Yes.
Now, Braille has always fascinated me because I'm walking down the corridor and I can see, you know, the name of the room is printed, and then there's Braille underneath. And I'm always wondering, like, how's a blind person going to even know that the plaque, which is, you know, 1 inch by 1 inch or something up there on the wall, am I just being silly? Like, are these things actually used and useful, or is it just window dressing to pretend to be inclusive?
Well, to me, to be honest, Braille is a wonderful literacy tool. It was something that I didn't grow up learning. I picked it up when I felt the need to read books to my children, that audio books were insufficient, that I needed to do the actual physical exercise of reading with my kids. And I tried to take it up and I tried to learn it. What was fascinating for me with that was, you know, being right-handed, the sensitivity in my right hand wasn't as efficient for Braille as it was with my left hand, which was really interesting. And so I learned how to read it at a much older age than, you know, kids who are born blind may have. It is a really important tool for literacy purposes, because I realized that just listening to words and hearing letters was not sufficient when it came to the concept of actually being literate. When I read a sentence the first time when I learned Braille, I mispronounced the word death because I was reading it phonetically, and I said death, and I was like, oh, I gasped and I said, oops, I mean death, because I forgot what it looks like.
Oh, and you found that Braille helped you with that?
I found that Braille was an incredible tool in that regard.
Well, I was going to ask you, you mentioned audiobooks, and now we have computers that read text to talk. So is Braille now becoming an obsolete tool?
Oh, absolutely not. Braille is a very useful tool. It is not window dressing. For literacy purposes, it's really important. On signage, like you mentioned earlier, I don't know that I want to put my hands all over walls to find these little plaques and feel the letters on them to make out what it says. I actually think for signage, what's more accessible is tactile signage. You know, it can be bigger, bolder, brighter, high contrast, and feelable.
Yeah,
and you don't have to be a Braille user to be able to feel it, especially for people who lose vision later in life.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, at the mosque near me, ISNA Canada's mosque in the Mississauga, I came across, well, we came across when we were tidying out a cupboard, a Quran in Braille, and I think it was humongous, like 5 boxes or 40 volumes or something huge. Have you, is this common? Like, is the Quran in Braille common?
The Quran in Braille is available through various charities around the world, including Malaysia and Turkey, who supply those free globally. There are some other more fancier versions in Braille that come with some sort of production cost. Braille materials can actually be shipped globally free by snail mail. The copy at ISNA, actually, we are probably the ones who supplied it to ISNA. when it was donated to us, and we felt that, you know, every mosque should have a Braille copy of the Quran. Islam has a tremendous history of scholarship preceding Braille, but scholars who were blind, who memorized the Quran, who taught the Quran, who provided tafsir and analysis and, you know, tremendous wisdom in transmitting Islamic knowledge, who were blind.
And so
and in their honor and recognition, I think it's important that mosques have a Braille copy of the Quran available.
And then they'd need to advertise it, because one of the things that I was thinking when we came across this Quran in a box, obviously that's not very useful for someone who doesn't even know it's there. But if there's going to be a shelf of Braille Qurans, then there needs to be announcements or advertisements, right? Because otherwise, how's anybody even going to know that it's there?
Sometimes symbolic gestures are important, and yes, people need to be made aware, not only so that they can actually use it if they are literate in Braille, but also symbolically to feel included and accommodated in their place of worship, and to raise awareness amongst people that, hey, yes, there's Arabic Quran Braille, there's English transliterated Braille Qurans, you know, that the Quran can be accessed by people who have low or no vision if they use Braille.
And how do you think the mosques are doing in terms of including blind Muslims?
Very poorly. Very poorly in terms of, you know, we've made some headway when it comes to physical accessibility because of the building code in more newly constructed mosques, etc. But there are still tremendous barriers. I mean, you know, going to the mosque as somebody who's blind, if I don't have somebody accompanying me, I have to depend on the kindness of others, and, you know, the pity just pours out, right? I can imagine the same thing with the brothers. And especially if I don't have somebody accompanying me who's going into the same section as me. So if I'm going with my husband, he has to eyeball a friend for me that I can go into the mosque with. Or I'll fake my way and people will be like, oh, let me help you. Oh, you know, like suddenly all the pity pours out and they want to grab my arm or whatever to steer me to where I need to be guided.
Does that feel humiliating?
Very much so.
And we have about 30 seconds left, but that just reminded me of the whole guide dog issue. Can you tell us about the whole problem with guide dogs in 30 seconds?
There is no problem with guide dogs. They are there to serve people who are blind or who, you know, have other needs as an accommodation. And I think we have to think out of the box and find ways to facilitate that for people who are blind who want to come to the mosque.
And we know that Muslims have problem because of the issue with bringing dogs into the mosque, and that has probably counted against the guide dog and the person using it.
It indeed has, and there are different schools of thought around dogs, and I think, you know, there's a lot of relearning we have to do with understanding and appreciating service animals. A lot of our values around dogs are intertwined with our cultural context.
Right.
We need to demystify them.
Well, unfortunately, that might have to be another show. We've run out of time, but thank you very much for coming on and helping us celebrate World Braille Day.
Thank you.
You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. If you like what we do, like, subscribe, and share. Stay safe and God bless.